Hey there, thanks for clicking on the video. I'm Luke.
I'm Chris.
We're the Creative Criticals. Roll the intro.
A Quiet Place was released in 2018 and stars Jim from The Office, who also sometimes goes by John Krasinski. It also stars his wife in real life, Emily Blunt, who plays the character of his wife in the movie. It was directed by John Krasinski and is known as a horror, sci-fi, drama, suspense trip. I think the overall message of the movie, and for those who have seen it, I hope you agree, is family. Just the family dynamic, namely fatherhood. It's told a lot of the times from Jim's perspective on how to be a father, but also Emily Blunt's character, of having to be a mother in a world that's fallen apart.
In this world that's happening in the movie, there's these creatures who we don't know much about them. All we know is that they are very sensitive to sound and that they will kill you. And so the movie is very good about not giving us a whole lot to go on with this entity.
Yeah.
Because it makes it, in my opinion, makes it a little scarier. Because you're up against something you don't know a whole lot about. All you know is that they are dangerous and you've got to be quiet to survive. And so one of the main themes is just seeing how can a family unit actually stick together, be a cohesive family unit, and kind of carve out a life for themselves in this new world. There's no end in sight. You have no idea if life will ever be normal again. So kind of trying to find some level of normalcy in this world.
And reason to live.
Reason to live and staying together and surviving together. And the only way that they can survive is silence. So that's I think the general message of the movie is can you stay a family in those circumstances? So what are some initial thoughts that you had about the movie?
I think, like you said, this movie was very quiet, hence A Quiet Place. I saw this movie in a theater full of people, and it was great. It was the quietest movie experience I've ever had in my life. Like at the beginning of the movie when you have popcorn and stuff, you go to the one piece, then you're just like bear grabbing it. But during the movie, I don't think I reached in the popcorn thing again.
It is legitimately. It's the only movie I've ever seen. When we left the movie, I had half a bag of popcorn left, and that never happens. Normally, I finish my whole bag of popcorn pretty much by the time the first act's over. I'm done with my popcorn, and not this time. It was quiet.
Yeah. So with it being quiet most of the movie, it's a very visually drawn movie. They use visuals to kind of tell the story. They just kind of established this world and universe without giving you really much background of what happened, but they do it visually. The sound design in the movie, like again, every sound is there's a purpose.
Right.
Like there's a purpose for every little sound.
Each sound that happens actually fits part of the narrative of the story, because when a sound takes place, you know that the creatures are coming.
Yeah.
And so there's an initial sound in the very beginning of the movie. Don't want to give all the spoilers away, but if you haven't seen the movie by now, go out there and
get on
and watch it. It's a great movie. Definitely recommend it. But here comes some spoilers. So there's a sound in the very beginning with a kid in the rocket.
Yeah.
And it's one of the shots in the trailer. It's one of the most heart-wrenching shots when you're seeing John Krasinski run trying to save his kid, but he can't get there. And so that immediately establishes in the very beginning that these noises, every time there is going to be a noise, something is going to happen. And so whenever a noise does take place, whether it be the rocket going off in the very beginning, or when the kids are playing the board game and they knock something over, you have this fear the whole time that when a noise happens, something bad's about to happen. And so I remember seeing people saying things like they would go into the bathroom after the movie, turn on the sink, be like, "Oh,
what
stop.
are you doing?
Don't turn on any noises."
Are you crazy?
In terms of character development, what do you think is going on in this movie?
Excuse me. So the father, as guys, we're gonna relate, to the man. And Krasinski also had a sick beard in the movie. We got to see bearded Jim,
right?
So that was nice. I remember the Office episode where Dwight's like, "You can grow the best beard in the office," and I bet you can grow the best beard in the office. Dwight knew what he was talking about. Yeah. But for his character in particular, I'm not a father, don't have kids yet, but I think his journey of, you see in his face a lot of times, like where there are times he just is tired of fighting,
right.
But then he just keeps going. He continues to fight, and his love for his kids. And again, spoiler, at the beginning, the one kid doesn't make it,
right.
And I think they handled that really well too. Like with kid deaths in movies, you have to be careful with that kind of thing, because it can be too much. I think they did it to where it was horrible and terrifying, but it wasn't a bloody mess.
One thing I think that is incredible is the concept, is the idea of grieving the loss of a family member while also not being able to make a sound.
Yeah.
And so you can tell that, like, inwardly it's destroying them, but they can't cry, they can't scream. Like you think about, that's not the natural order of things for a parent to lose a child.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how it's supposed to work. I heard a man at a funeral once give some remarks, and he said that we have a word for when a man loses his wife, and it's a widower. We have a word for when a woman loses her husband, it's widow. We have a word for when a child loses a parent, it's orphan. There is no word for when a parent loses a child, because it's not supposed to be that way. And so it's like, that's kind of, you have that pain going on in the parents, but they can't make a sound. Speaking of sound,
yeah.
Our train's
we would be
by.
dead right now because of the stupid train outside. Yeah. No, yeah, that's very true, and it was very heavy. And yet he continued to fight, continued to care for his family, and also the family still found little pieces of peace in their life, like they're playing the board games together. And if you notice, some of the pieces are like cloth, like she knitted together some pieces of cloth, so like that showed that they still care that their kids, can escape and play and enjoy themselves. So
they've like invented new ways of doing dinner, like she's cooking using different methods, and it's like, so it's showing that this family is resilient, that they're going to continue to live life and be a family. Just they've had to adjust to new circumstances.
Yeah.
So yeah, as character development.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we see developing through the father's character. We see that developing through obviously the parents. They're grieving the loss of their child while also trying to keep the family together. Now we have the development of the girl who's deaf. Now she's kind of the reason why, like I said, we're getting into major spoilers, kind of the reason why her brother was killed in the first place, because she disobeyed and came back and gave him the batteries to that toy. She didn't understand her parents, especially her father, decision and why he said no.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wanted to do her own thing. So you kind of have that tension building all the way from the very beginning of a relationship between father and a daughter, which is something I think we see culturally played out constantly. Yeah. That's a classic relationship, but you see her character is developing throughout the movie of her just being constant tension between her and her father. Mm-hmm. And that all comes to a head at that moment at the truck.
Yeah, and also the brother, like where he's the whole movie, he's just living in fear. Mm-hmm. I mean, as you would,
right.
Especially at that age, living in that fear and also grieving, his brother that he had lost, and seeing some horrible things happen. And then through the movie, you're just kind of seeing that fear develop. And then there's a moment where his mother, Emily Blunt's character, is in a pretty intense situation, and it's do or die.
Right.
like, how is she going to make it out of this? And that boy shoots off the fireworks and steps up to protect his mom. So I think that was kind of the height of his character. That he faced his fear and he did what he needed to do for his family, and that's what being a man is.
It starts out, you see throughout the movie, he's scared. And then there's a point in time where he doesn't want to go with his dad into the down to get fish and to hunt and to bring food back for the family. He doesn't want to go because he's afraid of these monsters he saw kill his brother. He's living afraid of this world, and his mom actually tells him, you go with your dad, you listen to him, and it's like they're forcing him into living life in this world. There's an arc with his story where he's terrified. They even get to that point, and he's scared even then to make a noise by the water, even though his dad's reassuring him, you can't, over here we're fine. But in that moment, you pointed it out, when he has to shoot off the rocket, he doesn't have a choice anymore, and it's like he's kicked out and it's time.
Right.
You've got to go do this. Your mom needs you. You've got to do this. You've got to pull through for the family. And he does. And it's like that. His character arc is actually one of my favorites because obviously being a son of a great man, it's kind of, I relate to that.
Yeah.
Being launched out into the world to, be your own man. And so that story arc was really beautiful.
Definitely.
Obviously, the ultimate development is the relationship between the daughter and the father at the truck when the father's massive spoiler, the biggest spoiler of the whole movie, when he gives his life for his kids. And he signs the words, "I love you." And in the theater, dude, I had to pull back because I was about to cry. Just to see that he said, "I've loved you, I've always loved you," and then he lets out the scream, basically giving himself up for his daughter. And so there's that's the ultimate, I think, the moment where you kind of really see the story comes to that moment. But so that's character development
for sure. And so talking about fear and these creatures in this movie, is considered a horror movie. As far as being a horror movie, how do you think it holds up? Like, was it scary?
Some of the scares could land on the cheap side. Some of the there wasn't a whole lot of jump scares, but there were a couple where it's something against the window. It's just a loud noise. It's not really scary, but for the most part, you're scared every time a sound happens. So, and
you're just like you said, with other horror movies, and I'm very picky when it comes to horror movies because like slashers they're not scary to me. Like the original Halloween's good and stuff like that, but just the cheap, bloody jump scares all the time, because 9 times out of 10, I would say most people know when the jump scares are coming. I definitely do. And it's cheap. They can be used well, and they're not a lot in this movie. But what made this movie scary was the situation. And knowing that somewhere in the distance or close, you don't know that there are these creatures. And, the theater was very invested. Like, again, that's when you've made a good
when
movie.
No one's making a noise.
When no one's making a noise in a public theater. That's quite a feat.
There's a type of horror that leaves me feeling nauseated. Like I actually feel uncomfortable. I didn't get that in this movie as so much as I was suspenseful. The suspense was definitely tangible. You're afraid for that family. And it's something that you showed, like we've talked about a little bit. We're both fans of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and there's something that they talked about, which was secondary belief. And so in that moment, it's like this, when you're watching the film, it almost like the outside world doesn't exist.
Right.
You're in this.
You're invested.
You're in a quiet place. You're there.
Yeah.
And
like you might die watching.
And you're invested in watching this family dynamic unfold. And so there is this kind of, you're afraid for them. Even though I don't think I had that like horror movie kind of sick to my stomach, like walking away just disturbed.
Right.
I didn't think about it for weeks afterwards.
The monsters themselves, like the creatures, whatever. Like we said, we don't know where they came from. The movie doesn't tell you that. There will be a part 2 that's coming out soon.
We're excited about that.
Yeah, we are. And I think that may give some more insight into where they came from, but I don't necessarily care, where they came from.
Right.
Because they're, what I would want to know is, are they friendly? Like, right. And it establishes pretty quickly, no, they just want to kill you.
Right.
And they look terrifying. And they got like these giant scythe hands.
Right.
That could like murder you, so there's not much chance of fighting.
The beginning of the movie, we see this family. They're up against a challenge where if they make a noise, they're going to be killed. Their response to that, obviously, initially, we don't know how to fight them, so we're going to be quiet. We will figure out a way to live silently, so as not to attract them. By the end of the film, they have discovered that that her hearing device, though it doesn't help her hear, the frequency is like the kryptonite for these creatures, and they've learned this finally. You wish that she had learned that when she was in the truck and she's fiddling with it, and instead her dad has to scream. They didn't know it yet, but had they known,
Jim wouldn't have died.
Right, he wouldn't have died. But so they figured this out, and then they have this they have this amplifier, they have all this stuff, and you see at the end, right before the credits hit, they cock the gun and they're ready to fight. And they have a new way of fighting, and now it's not, we're gonna cower and be afraid, which I'm not saying that as a negative. Like, obviously you would be afraid. The fact that they even built a life silently is proof that they were being brave. But they're not going to fight through silence. Now they know they have a way to fight, and he kind of just ends on the note of the monsters are coming, but they're not afraid.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I like. Personally, I really like how that ended.
Yeah.
Overall thoughts?
Yeah, overall, it was a good, I wouldn't necessarily call it a horror movie, but it was a good movie. It was very enjoyable. For that, however long it was, I was invested, like you said, the outside world. That's what makes a good book, a good movie, is right. Can it take you out of the world or situation you're in and have you care enough to want to see it. And so I think I'm excited to see part 2, and I would like to see Krasinski do more work.
Right.
Because he's a phenomenal actor. He's shown himself. He's not just the Jim.
Right.
Like with Jack Ryan, he can be an action guy. He can be a character-driven guy with Quiet Place, and he can be funny. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to see more from him, and I think this was a definite win, right. For sure. If I had to give it a score, 1 out of 10, I would give it a 7.
All right. My thoughts on it are pretty much the same. An investing story, captivating. It inspired secondary belief, makes you genuinely have emotional reactions and responses to what's happening to the characters. I cared about most of the characters. There's one character in particular that bothered me for the most part, but the story surrounding that character pays off.
The girl,
yeah. So it pays off in the end. So I think overall, as far as the character study goes, it was a phenomenal film, and definitely one that was worth going to the theater to see it. So if I had to give it a score on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm thinking about an 8. So one above.
Yeah.
All right. So if you like what you saw in this video, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. Those things really help the algorithm, help us get more people on these videos, and we're going to continue to make content like this. If you like movies, if you like music, anything creative, books, all that stuff, that's what we're here to do. We are the Creative Criticals. We'll see you in the next video.